Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the October 1st Teaching and Learning Committee meeting of the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. I definitely want to first by saying to all of our school principals, happy National Principals Month. This is National Principals Month. I have an incredible school leader, and I know that many of our school leaders in Baltimore City are wonderful as well, so we want to celebrate them. This also happens to be National Bullying Prevention Month, so I want to highlight that. We're still in National Hispanic Heritage Month, and today is the first day for students to turn in and complete their FAFSA forms. So we want to make sure that all of those things are at the highlight of our brain as we start a brand new month. We are definitely excited to hear from our folks in regard to the MCAT, which is the new park, right? MCAT, ELA, and math results.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Teresa Jones, and I serve as the Chief Achievement and Accountability Officer. And just a couple of opening comments before I turn it over to the team. So first, I just want to remind everyone that we have delivered the overall park results publicly. Those were presented at the August 27th board meeting when the state lifted the embargo. The purpose of today's discussion is to go one step further beyond what we typically report. And so what you're going to hear from the team is you are going to hear about the data and what our numbers show, particularly as we've had the experience of Park over a 5-year period. But you're also going to get some insights around how we've been able to identify schools that have done some phenomenal work, and they're actually outpacing some of the other schools, not only within our district, but across the state. And we're very fortunate to have some school representatives here today to speak to that. So again, I'm going to turn it over to the team now, and I want to just thank in advance the folks that are here from Tench Tillman, and they're going to talk to us a bit about their experience and how their efforts have now manifested themselves over multiple years of improved and noteworthy performance on the park assessment.
I'm Christopher Wan. I'm the Director of Research.
Liepa Bobarine, Manager of Program Evaluation.
Good afternoon, Janice Lane, ED of Teaching and Learning.
And we are here to present the MCAP, formerly known as Park results from the 2018-19 school year. My clicker's not working here. One sec. All right. So the plan for today, we're going to hit 4 major topics. First one is how did city schools perform overall on the MCAP Park this year? So we went over, as Teresa mentioned, that with you at the end of August. It's been a month, so we're just going to review where our results stacked up against the state of Maryland and how we changed from last year. The second thing we would like to do is talk about, now that we have 5 years of park data, what has happened to that first cohort of test takers? So our students who were in 3rd grade in that 14-15 school year, how have they fared now 5 years later when they're in 7th grade? And we're going to take a look at how they've moved between the different park performance levels over time. Third thing we'd like to do is look at our student groups and how they've performed over time. And then finally, we'd also like to look at schools that have produced really strong gains, really strong growth in some of our students' groups, and highlight that. So we'll start with a review of district results. Big headline here is that we were up in ELA and about even in math when we compared our results to last year. So in ELA, 1.4 percentage points up in the 3 to 5 grade band, 3 percentage points up in the 6 to 8. And then math, a bit of a mixed, up slightly in 3 to 5, and then down very slightly in 6 to 8. What we'll do now is kind of go through each of the grade levels, each of the tests our kids take by math and ELA, and compare ourselves to previous year and the state. So these slides you might have been familiar with from our previous presentation. I'm going to first look at our English Language Arts exam, ELA. We were, as was the state, up across the board here, which is very good progress. We actually outperformed the state or had a greater positive change than they did in 4th, 6th, 7th, and 10th grade. Our largest gap as of this most recent year, is in ELA 10. That's about 26.6 points. And our smallest gap is in 7th grade at about 21.5 points. One point I would like to call attention to here is our 3rd graders. We were up 0.4 percentage points here, while the state outpaced us slightly and by increase of 2.3 percentage points. And that's something we'd like to see, increase and compete better with the state, because that's really the first time we get to see how some of that early literacy work has gone for our students. Moving on to the math results, a little bit more of a mixed picture here, as we mentioned in the first slide. Luckily, we seem to outpace the state in basically all but our 3rd grade math exam. So while we went down in some tests, the state went down in a few more, our changes were generally either more positive or more favorable than they were in most of the categories, with the exception of just very small difference in 3rd grade. Our largest gap here is actually in 3rd grade, and it's 22.7 points. And our smallest gap is in our 8th grade, which is only about 7.2 points different from the state. You'll notice that looking at this, our 8th grade math results seem to be quite a bit lower, and likewise for the state, than the rest of the results. That's due in part because as we expand Algebra 1 for our 8th graders, a lot of those students are moving from taking the Math 8 exam and actually taking the Algebra 1 exam. And those tend to be some of our most talented students academically that get in that kind of honors track, Algebra 1 in 8th grade. And that is why we think the results are so much lower both for us, and that's happening at the state level. It makes 8th grade and Algebra 1 a little tricky to look at. And actually the high school tests, it's really difficult to compare them apples to apples with previous years. And that's because of changing graduation requirements. So one thing we like to do when we look at our 2 high school tests, our Algebra 1 and ELA, is to break them down into first-time test takers as well as students who are retesters. And we've had more and more retesters join our test cohort in the past 2 years. When we started testing in Park, we had about 4,000 kids taking Algebra 1. Now on a yearly basis, we're up to 9,400 students. So as those kids now have graduation requirements, they have to come back and take the test. And it makes looking at district results really tough because more and more of those students are retesters. So we like to break it down into these 2 categories. Luckily for Algebra 1, we were up about 1 to 2 points for first-time test takers and our retesters. We are actually, in terms of retesters, beating the state slightly in terms of their retesting pass rate, 2.7 versus 2.4. We are also up a large amount in our ELA 10 first-time test takers, almost 8 percentage points. The state did well there, up 4 points. They did a little bit better than we did on our ELA retesters with a gain of 0.7 points, whereas we were held about even with a small decrease of 0.1. One thing that we get asked a lot is when we're looking at tables like this, you'll notice like Algebra 1, first-time test takers went up, 1.9, and then our retesters went up 1.0. So it becomes a little strange when we go back a slide and we look at why then did the district only go up by 0.3. The average of 1 and 1.9 isn't 0.3. And that's because as more and more retesters join our pool, it's pulling or weighting the average down to that lower number. And that makes it really difficult to just look at ELA 10 over time because really the type of students, as I mentioned, the number of retesters has increased dramatically, and that's pulling that overall average down. So it gets a little tricky, but we did check the numbers. Those are correct. A lot of people think we might have made a mistake because they don't average out, but when the number of students taking retesters change, that can have that effect. For this next portion, I'm going to take a look at a cohort analysis we did, and I think this is really one of the most interesting things we'll be looking at today. What we did for this analysis is we focused on our ELA 3 and Math 3 test takers who tested in 14-15, which was the first year we administered Park. And we've now followed them up till this most recent year, where they're now in 7th grade testing on ELA 7 and Math 7, and want to see how they did. So we have a lot of numbers on this table, but let me walk you through what they mean. So what we have here is all of our students who started in that 3rd grade class in 14-15. The rows of this table represent the counts of students who started at each of the performance levels in school year 2014-15. And the columns represent where they ended up. So I can look at the first row, and I see that there were 11,182 students who started at a level 1. 646 of them ended up at a level 1. 324 ended up at a level 2. So it's really just a straightforward kind of cross-tabulation between where they started and where they finished. So a lot of numbers to look at here, so we've called out some of the ones we want to focus on today. And I think what this does is it really helps us get an idea in a very visceral sense of how have our students performed over time. What we see, that first bubble I've circled, that 4.04%, that is the number of level 1 students who were able to grow to be proficient 5 years later in this first cohort. So only 4% of them were able to jump all the way up from a level 1 to be proficient at a level 4 or 5. We see in terms of those that were able to make it to a level 3, that represents about 18%, 17.9 were able to make that. So unfortunately, we really need to see better growth among those level 1s. It's becoming very difficult when a student starts at a level 1 to see them end up be proficient, at least in the time span of 5 years that we looked at here. The second set of results we look at, that large oval, these are our level 3 students, so students who started at a level 3. And we sometimes will call these kids like a little bit on the bubble. They're right at proficient. We would really like them to see proficient. But what we see is about, on our ELA test, 34% of them are able to make that jump. So about a third of them. Only about 67.6% of them are able to maintain a 3. So in a sense, we're losing about a third of those kids to go back down to a level 1 or 2. The last bubble we have on here is that 70.5. This represents students who started at a level 4, and how many of them were able to stay proficient. So 5 years later, they remained proficient on the exam. And that is about 70.5%. Which means about 30% of our level 4 students will go down to a 1, 2, or 3.
And I do just want to clarify, in this case, it's the level 4 and 5. So when we're taking a look at that column for proficiency, it's levels 4 and 5. Similarly to the left where it says percentage at 3, 4, and 5, that's inclusive of all 3 performance levels.
So the columns on the right are included on the ones to the left. Yeah, thanks, Teresa. All right, so we'll take a similar look at our math results. So in a lot of ways, these mirror some of the overall results we've looked at when we look at a district overview, in that we've had typically a little bit stronger performance in ELA than in math. When we look at these same callouts again, starting with the first one, students who start at a level 1 in that math 3, 14-15 school year, only about 0.2% of them are able to make it to a 4 or 5 in a 5-year time. So that's a very small fraction of those students. When we look at our level 3 students, about 55% of them, about half of them, are able to maintain a 3, 4, or 5, but only about 16 or 15.9% of them are able to get off the bubble into that proficiency. So again, would really like to see those numbers be higher, so we're able to move those 3s into being proficient. Finally, the last call out we have here is our level 4s who are able to maintain proficiency, and we're seeing that happened in this cohort at about a rate of 54.7%. So about half of our students were able to maintain proficiency when they started at a 4. So sure.
There, Dr. Bondima has a question that she'd like to ask.
Okay.
Thank you.
To
slide 6 and 7, and probably 6 and 7. I just have a general question that I would like to recommend. You mentioned something about the students, you did an average on, looking at the students who had taken the test and who had retaken the test, were retested, right?
Yep.
And you kind of averaged that in together.
Mhm.
It would be very interesting to see you could add another chart to see the difference between the students who took the test and how well did they do after they were retested, and the students who had taken it and didn't get a second test.
Okay.
Is that possible?
Is
That's
this what you're
slide
looking
7.
for on slide 7? Because this is
Okay.
where we've broken out the proficiency rate of first-time test takers versus retesters, which means they're taking the test for a second or more, or third time. So what we see here typically is our first-time test takers, they do much better than retesters. And if you want to sort of think about what does that mean, Algebra 1 retesters, we had a proficiency rate of 2.7.
Okay, I didn't, okay.
So we need to do a lot better in terms of getting our retesters into a place where they're able to pass the exam and stop having to retake it. If they continue to not pass the exam, they'll need to complete bridge projects or, alternative pathways to graduation.
Okay. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Sure. All right. So we took a look at our cohort at the district level. What we wanted to do in these next few slides is highlight schools that are really bucking the trend that the district showed and what I just talked about, schools that are really doing amazing things, moving their students through these levels. So the first slide here, we've picked 5 schools, and these are the schools that did the best in this category, who were really able to move their level 1 students into a 3, 4, or 5, so to get them to grow at least 2 levels. What we see is that, and we've combined math and ELA here, so we could get our sample counts high enough to calculate decent percentages with. When we look at that at the district level, only about 14% of students who are level 1 are able to move to a 3, 4, 5. At Hampstead Hill, they're doing that with 78% of their students, so the majority of their students. At Southwest Baltimore Charter, 46, Tench Tillman, 40%, Lakeland, 40, and Commodore John Rogers, 37. All those about, over twice the district rate of growth of those level 1 students. Very impressive, and that's a very hard thing to do, as we saw at the district level, to take those level 1 kids all the way to a level 3.
Janice, what are they doing differently at those schools that maybe some others aren't doing, because they're seeing some significant trends here? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Can we come back to that after we have Tench present? Because they're going to be sharing some of those findings along the way as we go. And then we'll come back and circle through to that.
Sure.
All right, the second group of schools we're going to look at are schools that have done a really outstanding job of maintaining students at proficiency. So these are schools that started with level 4 or 5 students and were able to keep them at a level 4 or 5. So district overall, that happened about 66, 2/3 of the time. We had one school that was able to do that with 100%. And they didn't have a single student fall down from proficiency over the time period we looked at. And also Tunbridge, Thomas Johnson, Hampstead Hill, and Patterson Park Public Charter, all above 90% being able to keep their kids in proficiency. And that's also very important when we looked at the district. And for some of those groups, we were losing almost half of our students who were proficient to become not proficient. So this is as equally as important as growing kids who are level 1, is making sure that those who are already proficient stay on track. The final set of schools that we're highlighting, again, are for these our students who are level 3, our bubble students. And we wanted to see schools that were able to take these level 3 students and have them cross the threshold for proficiency and get to that level 4 or 5. So grow at least one, maybe even 2 levels. Overall in the district, that happens about a quarter of the time, 24%. We have schools here, and one today, Tench Tillman with us, was able to do this with 90% of their students. Hampstead Hill, Patterson Park Public Charter, Southwest Baltimore, and Hampton also were recognized for being well above the district average and being able to move those students from level 3 to proficiency. All right.
Next, we're going to take a look at another way of understanding student growth on Park, and it is everyone's favorite student growth percentile, the SGP. So the SGP is first calculated at a student level, where for each student, we determine the percent of similar peers that the student outperforms. And then at the school level, we take a look at that average middle student SGP. So half of the students at the school have a higher growth rate and half have a lower growth rate. Really, what we want you to understand about this is that this is the speed in which the student is growing. So how fast are students growing? Here we have a little picture of the different growth rates and typical. Now SGP is on a 1 to 100 scale. Typical is 41 to 60.
I actually like to think of it in terms of miles per hour. Like you're taking a road trip, and if you're going like 50, 60, you're doing all right. But if you can really, Leopa gave a much more detailed description of it. But it's the speed at which a kid is growing, and that's really I think the important point about SGPs.
So if we take a look at our district median state SGP by test over the 3 years of Park data that we have SGP for, we see that for each test code, all of the median SGPs at the district level are in the typical range. We do see improvement over time. So in 2018 and 2019, we see increased speed of student growth. We see middle school students are moving at a faster rate than elementary school students. And we want to keep in mind that an SGP of 50 is the state median. So if we as a district want to be closing the gap with the state in terms of our proficiency rates, we really need to have our SGP, our speed, be above 50 to 51 or higher to start closing that gap with the state. Here we have a map of some of the schools with the highest median state SGPs. This one is in ELA. So this is grades 3 through 5 or 6 through 8. Empowerment Academy, they're at the top, actually is among the highest for both grades 3 through 5 and 6 through 8. So when we see this 76, the way to interpret this number is that the average student at Empowerment performed better than 76% of similar peers across the state. Half of students grew even more quickly than that, and half less quickly. This is extraordinarily high. We should be very proud of all the schools on this list. And you can also see that there are schools in both low and high investment areas on this map. Here we see a similar map for math. These are the schools with the highest median state SGPs in math for either grade band. Again, here just to point out, Wolf Street Academy has the average student growing more quickly than 85% of similar peers across the state. I also want to point out that actually Tench Tillman is appearing on both of these lists of our highest performing schools in terms of median state SGPs, both in ELA and in math. So we'd really love to hear from them a little bit about what they are doing.
So Commissioner McFadden, I think you were a little in front of us in the PowerPoint. So I have the pleasure of introducing to you Tench Tillman because you did see them come up quite a few times across the different slides in growth areas, as well as improvement of scores across. So they're going to be sharing with you some of the practices that they use. Then we can come back and talk about things that we are learning across the district and how to replicate those. So I have the pleasure to introduce Principal Samuel to you. Our literacy coach, Miss Ashley, and our math coach, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, you can have my seat so you can be at a mic.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and make sure that the red turns to green.
Gotcha.
I'm going to get a photo of you all while you're up here because I love the colors.
Oh, these are our
You
colors
know, we
here.
need to tweet this camaraderie out, so
Please tag us, Tench
thank you for it.
I think you guys alluded to what were some of the things that we were doing at Tench Tillman. And definitely the camaraderie that you see, it is definitely a team effort. We have highly effective leaders in key positions. So one of the key levers is our attendance. We have 96% attendance. But that doesn't happen by happenstance. We have a key leader in that position who is our assistant principal who is not here today, but the leaders have set structures and routines that they follow day in and day out. So it's like clockwork, and our community coordinator will talk a little bit about that because each of the leaders will talk about their key levers. And I think another bucket is that we really add additional, when the children are there, we have them there, but then we also have to do a lot around teacher development. So we add additional staff development on our own. There are especially staff development for new teachers around Teach Like a Champion that our coaches do for free after school with new teachers. Our ILT, we take additional learning walks on our own, and teachers give feedback to other teachers. So we're creating a culture of leadership. We really establish universal practices at our school, and we really make sure that we have a strong community base. So we have figured out that these levers have really moved the work for us, in addition to tracking our data. So we, every summer, meet as an ILT, and we set our own goals, in addition to what's in the SPP, in addition to what we, as a school, want to make sure we improve in specific areas. So we meet during the summer, and we set our goals, and we monitor those goals. At every chance we get, we celebrate our teachers and our students when they are making accomplishment and hitting those goals. So those are some key practices that we've learned along the way. And I would like for our team to really delve a little deeper to give you some of those practices that they do in their key areas. So we're gonna start maybe with math.
Sure. So Ms. Samuel already mentioned the idea of universal practices. That was just a big priority in general from the math department and the ELA department. It's just making sure that every classroom looked the same as much as possible in terms of high leverage teaching strategies. A couple that we've honed in on over the past few years is a focus on writing and a focus on student-to-student interaction. What we found through our data analysis in terms of writing is that our students were struggling a lot with the conceptual understanding aspect of rigor. So we really honed in on student writing, students justifying their work, defending their work, arguing for their work, and we honed in on that. We honed in on having opportunities for teachers to provide feedback to the students, students having opportunities to apply that feedback and grow from the feedback. Universally, in terms of student-to-student interactions, we take time in our collaborative planning to make sure that we're identifying tasks that can yield highly effective student-to-student discussions, making it more student-centered, student-friendly. In terms of informal observations, the ELA department and the math department, or the ELA coach and myself, we're in classrooms all the time, multiple teachers per day, providing feedback, providing what's going well, providing actionable next steps, meeting with those teachers to make sure that those actionable next steps actually come to fruition, and providing any supports necessary. We try our best to align the next steps to our priorities, whether it be writing or student-to-student interactions. Sometimes that might take a backseat to some of the newer teachers focusing on management or getting up with the Tench Tillman way. I don't want to take too much time away from ELA, but a couple other things just in terms of collaborative planning. Something that Ms. Samuel didn't mention is that she's really prioritized collaborative planning as a necessity at Tench Tillman. So we were doing 90 minutes before that was really a common thing. We've been doing that for a few years now. That gives us enough time to really dig in on what's happening across grades, digging into the standards. What does mastery of a math standard look like in your classroom? Do the math. Familiarize yourself with that standard. What are the misconceptions? What are the prerequisite standards that we might need to hit on in order for students to meet grade level standards? So we have the time to be able to actually do that and then follow up with the teachers. I think Ms. Ashley's probably going to hit on some other things, and I want to make sure that I give enough time for
For literacy, we have 4 main domains that we kind of focused on. The first one was being data-driven. We're making sure that we're always looking at the data. One of the major key levers I think that led to some of our growth with the ELA data specifically was we did a lot of celebrations around park. So we had a park prep rally where we invited 92Q and the students took park practice tests, and if they got it correctly, they could pie the administrators. If they got it wrong, we could pie them. We also had we had a luncheon with the students who scored 3s and 4s. So we started with the students who scored 4s. We talked about why or how they got that and what they needed to maintain that. And then we invited the students who scored 3s in, and the 4s gave them advice as to how to, get up to a 4. We do that. We've done that for a few years now. Another part that I think was really eye-opening for us, similar to what Dan said, was we focused on writing as a school for 2 years in a row. But this last year, we received a form from Stacy Place, and it's like a park writing data overlap. And what we did was we honed in on the PCRs to figure out where students were performing the best or the worst on which particular PCR. And then the teachers, based on that data, tailored their instruction to support those types of rating standards. We also last year when we implemented Wit and Wisdom, we wanted to really focus on the data that would be most aligned to the rigor of the assessment. And so we honed in on new read assessments and question sets. Those were 2 very key high levers that helped our teachers see where our students were falling and what we needed to do to push them to that level of rigor. We also did a very similar cohort data analysis for ELA and for math, similar to what you see here, but we tracked our own students so that we could identify patterns with students who were A, either continuously improving, or B, falling backwards or not moving. And then we tailored our instruction to ensure that we gave them the support they needed. It also helped us target specific teachers to hone in on our coaching practices, like who needs more support, who need less support, who can be a leader. And with that data as well, we implemented a school-wide intervention program where all hands are on deck. The administrators are pulling a group. Everyone in the building is Cutlers, pulling a group where students are just receiving targeted intervention for ELA and for math. And for coaching, Mr. Murphy hit on it earlier, but we also, in between the informal observations, we're also providing hands-on active coaching. So that might look like model lessons, co-teaching, cueing, elbow coaching, whatever that teacher needs, on whatever that indicator is that we identified in academic planning. And for high leverage strategies in literacy, one of the other things we focused on was feedback. We wanted our teachers to be giving targeted feedback consistently, and we did that in 2 ways. The first way was something called a check and change, where students were given folders with PCR tasks that mimic aligned assessments, and they would attempt the task, and the teacher would provide immediate feedback and give it back, and they would change their response or add whatever they needed to add. The teacher checked it again with a different focus and it just was a continuous 2-week cycle, and we did it every 2 weeks with every grade level from 3 through 8. For K through 8. And then the other thing that we implemented was is something called Carry the Pen. It's a strategy. And so when we use Carry the Pen, the teachers were coached on how to circulate in the classroom and provide immediate feedback on student work in the moment. So students understood that 1, it's a priority that you complete your work with accuracy, but then 2, I'm right here to support you. So I'm walking around and I'm giving immediate feedback on your work. I'm coming back and I'm checking on you. They also had their, I can't think of it, cruising clipboard to keep note of that data as well. And then the last thing I think in terms of universal practices that was really a high leverage form for us was we implemented a universal template, universal lesson planning template, because it allowed Mr. Murphy and I to give immediate lesson plan feedback to teachers when they submitted them. And we also made sure that the template had key components that aligned to effective instruction and also supported the internalization because we had two different curriculums being implemented last year. We had Wit and Wisdom and Amplify. So that's how it is for literacy.
Hi, my name is Rachel Cutler. I'm the community school coordinator at Tench Tillman Elementary Middle. I just want to speak on a few of the strategies that we implement as a community school that facilitates high academic achievement. As Ms. Samuel already talked about, attendance is a huge priority at our school. It starts with creating a culture and an expectation of 100% average daily attendance. So every day we have a team of 4 different people who are working on attendance strategies from as soon as students get in the building to almost sometimes noon every day. We're doing home visits every day, we're doing phone calls every day, and we do a lot of celebrations and activities every month to both celebrate students with perfect attendance and maintain that high average daily attendance. We also emphasize high quality partnerships that meet student needs, both student and family needs. So some of our partnerships not only focus on academic outcomes, but also meeting the social and emotional needs of our families. As you all know about the community school strategy, some of the programs that we're really proud of that help support our students are our Level 1 health clinic. So students are able to see a doctor in the school building. We have a 21st Century Community Learning Center after-school program with the Creative Alliance. So last year we had 150 of our students participate in after-school programming from 2:30 to 5:30 every day. We also have several mental health providers in the building meant to meet the needs of students who are in crisis. And we also have a number of school clubs that we've tracked students who have participated in certain clubs and seen academic gains specifically for students who have participated in those clubs. For example, we have a debate club, green team, robotics, Queens Club, all clubs that support the academic achievement of our students. The one other piece I want to speak on is parent engagement. For us, parent engagement needs to be authentic, meaning that parents are authentically engaged and participating in decisions about the school. So what that looks like in our school is that we have a structured volunteer program, including an orientation, training, follow-up with our parent volunteers. So we have a core base of volunteers every day in the school building, either participating, supporting our attendance strategy, or working in the classroom, working one-on-one with students that are, again, trained and celebrated just as anybody else in the Tench staff. The one other piece I want to speak on is just, again, going back to partnerships, is that it's important that we have partnerships that align with our school vision and strive to meet our school needs. So we have school family council meetings monthly, obviously. We also have partnership meetings that are meant to really align all of our partners on the same page so that our partners are meeting and supporting the needs that have been identified. One example is Johns Hopkins University. We had a huge shortage in technology. We were able to get a significant contribution from Johns Hopkins to meet our technology needs, and we're able to receive new computers, 3 new computer carts. That was important for our park testing.
You guys have any questions for us?
Dr. Bondima?
Yeah, thank you very much. I am so excited about everything that you've said. One question I was wondering if you had added or you were going to add, do you have a GED program for the parents at the school?
We currently do not. We have community partners that provide GED training. So when parents have come to us and requesting that support, I will send them over to the community center, whose name is now escaping me, in Butcher's Hill. Julie Community Center has GED services.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
And one other question. I was really excited about the fact that you make home visits. How do you go about doing that? If they're late, if they have not reported to school, you make a contact to the family? If you can't reach them, do you just go out and go to the home, and what happens there?
That's right. You basically got it. So at 8, as soon as students are coming in, we are, as soon as around 10 o'clock, we're getting our list of students who are absent for the day. We're calling all of our families, seeing what's going on, seeing what supports they need. If we are unable to reach a family, that's when we'll put them on the home visit list for the day. So we'll go, we have up-to-date addresses, we'll home visit, we have a sheet that we leave with them because oftentimes we're not catching one at the house, but it says why we visited, and ask parents to call into the school to let us know what's going on.
Thank you. I think you're doing an excellent, outstanding job.
What can I say? I'm just very impressed. It's wonderful. It's thorough and interwoven and supportive, and thank you.
Principal Samuel, how long have you been at the school?
I've been at Tench Tillman for 11 years.
For 11
Yeah.
years.
When I went there, I think if we were deemed a turnaround school, if we weren't, we should have been, because we were one of those schools that won the list that the state came over and provided support. And through those 11 years, we're just never satisfied. What can we do? What barriers can we remove? I think that's how we ended up with the level 1 house suite. So we don't fight with immunization. We don't, when our kids are immunized, they go around to the house suite. Our community is entrenched in poverty, as you know. So there are a lot of health needs that we are able to eradicate with the level 1 house suite. Whatever the barriers are, we create our own systems and structures to eradicate those barriers. If we have new teachers, how can we support them and get them up to speed? If we have parents that need support, what support do we need? So we are laser focused on our data and what barriers we need to remove so that students can achieve.
I am going to ask you about your teacher retention and how you're retaining teachers, but I can also make an assumption about your retention data with teachers because of the way that your content leads just talked about the additional supports that are given to teachers that need additional support, and then the back away for some that may not need. It's almost like you're differentiating support
Absolutely.
for your instructional staff so that they can meet the needs of their students. And if I were a teacher, that would be the school that I would want to be in.
Yeah.
Because I would be getting the tools and the supports that I need for my particular group of students. So can you talk a little bit about
Yeah,
retention?
you're spot on. When I first came, there was this cycle of turnover. And once I figured out what teachers, they need ongoing support. And so the coaches are dedicated. That is 100% of what they do. They're not in the cafeteria. They do greet in the morning and exit in the afternoon, and the rest of the day is dedicated to supporting teachers, co-teaching, modeling, giving feedback, informals. So that they're dedicated 100% to math and science, to ELA and social studies, and that's all they do. So of course, teachers feel supported. That's the number one reason why teachers leave. I don't feel supported. So then they also have Ms. Williams and I, the assistant principal, and myself, but we can make plans all day long to give feedback and their competing priorities, but if they have dedicated support staff that's supporting them, that has absolutely closed the door and helped develop teachers in a much quicker rate.
I don't want to linger too much, but it's always good to hear about the schools that are doing the absolute best work for our young people. What I do want to mention, number one, is that we need to duplicate what you're doing around the district. And the reason why I'm saying that is because what you didn't say until the very end is the poverty. You just spoke about that. Before you spoke about that, you talked about the team that you developed. The team that you've developed with your admin folks, the content leads, and your teachers. You talked about that, and systems that you put in place with your teams. You talked about authentic parent engagement and making sure that the engagement is relevant to the parents that you're serving. I think that is important because that keeps parents engaged in the process. You have volunteers that are in your building every single day and they're trained. You also talked about, and I'll mention again, these consistent processes and procedures that you've employed in your building, which I think are important for any school setting. You talked about standards-based instruction and how you are data-driven with your instruction. That is a model that we need to have in every school regardless of the students, that regardless of their backgrounds, their socioeconomic status. What it sounds like is that you all understand that the young people that you serve can achieve at high levels, and you're relentlessly going after that. And we've got to really model, you're the model for it, but we have to make sure that we're duplicating that throughout the district. So I just want to say kudos to the work that you're doing, and celebrating you as a school leader who has this visionary and strategic lens of making sure that all of your students have access. Talk to me a little bit about the arts there at your school. How are you integrating the arts in your program?
Well, that's great. That's a great question. I realize that, of course, we have traditional art and music, but that was a gap. So we did something strategic at our school. Our partner is Creative Alliance, and I did that because I wanted our kids and our students to have the experience of art. Some of our students, that is their creative outlet. They understand, and that's our time to really celebrate the arts. Also, we have a partnership with School for the Arts. So in our school, we have something called Hello Twigs. So that is a step just before Twigs. So the kids have a chance to go to the School for the Arts and actually take classes.
Is this just at Tench Tillman?
I think there are a number of key schools where School for the Arts realized that they were not receiving students from different zip codes. And so that partnership has been maintained with us, and we've actually tried to blossom that partnership. So the students will come into our school and they'll do presentations for the students around Martin Luther King or whatever time they can, and our kids just love it. They eat it up. So that's our way to expose them and really have them on that trajectory of different high schools and where they can go. They just love, the arts. So that's a really big part of who we are.
I appreciate it. Just let me know when I can visit. If you say anytime, it's going to be this week. I'm telling you already.
Thank
But
you.
thank you all for coming. Thank you for the work that you're doing for our young people. And we need more folks like you in our schools. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just like to echo the thanks for the school team coming out and spending time sharing expertise with us. Commissioner McFadden, I think you summarized some of the points that you heard that we have learned across several schools. I think one thing that was really important was the consistent leadership in the school, but also the vision for shared leadership that Principal Samuel embraces and empowers her team to do that work.
Ms. Lane, Janice, can I say also, I thought it was very wonderful that the principals take intervention groups. The administrators there are doing the pullouts
Yes.
and interventions as well. I mean, I just want to highlight that. In the distribution of leadership, I think it's important for those leaders to actually model what they want their teachers to do. It just builds a wonderful community of practice and learning. So, excuse me.
No, that's great. You could take my notes. I don't even need to finish. We're all set. One other thing I did want to highlight, though, about Tench, not only did they pop across the data and, very quietly said that they're never satisfied, but they were one of our first schools that stepped up as our literacy ILS. So they are an intensive learning site that has really shared their learning with us. And that we are working consistently in the Blueprint sites to learn from them and elevate that practice not only across the cohort of schools, but across the district as a whole. Also a school that in that project is involved in our continuous improvement, and I think they are a picture of continuous improvement. The way that they utilize the data and listen to their staff ongoing, listen to their students, the parents, the community, to really think about how to embrace what everyone in the entire community needs to be successful. I will just say some of the other schools that popped on that list share some of those similar characteristics around coaching work, collaborative planning, prioritization, et cetera, and the content teams within teaching and learning, not just in ELA and math, but across all content areas, as well as some of our subgroups, so our EL teams, et cetera, spend time in these schools really trying to understand how can we take that practice and elevate it.
So we have one more view we'd like to share with you today. We'll try to get through this last one pretty quickly, but we want to take a look at some of our student groups and performance differences between student groups. Here's an overview of the district ELA performance by student group over the 5 years of PARC data. So we still have large achievement gaps, and we see that our white students have stronger trend than other student groups. And so we want to take a look at how do we move proficiency. We have to accelerate growth. So again, we are going to take a look at some of those top schools accelerating student ELA performance by looking at that SGP. So within our Black student population, we're looking at the schools that have the highest median Black SGP. Some of these are the same schools that we've seen on the other list of the overall school. Especially you can see the percent of test takers at some of these schools is extremely high, in others it's lower. Within the Hispanic student population, you'll see for all but cross-country, these are very large Hispanic population schools. District-wide, we have about 11% of students Hispanic, but these schools have much larger proportions. Now, taking a look at the same overview in math, PARC over the 5 years, again, we see improvement across groups, but at different rates.
Do we have, I'm curious, do we have the number of white students that met or exceeded in comparison to the other groups that are listed? The actual numbers?
So you mean the count, not the percentage?
The counts, yes.
Yeah, we do, and I think that's actually on our file online that we post for PARC results, but we're more than happy to get you those exact counts if you're
Thank
interested.
you, Overlector.
Sure.
So then, taking a look at some of those top accelerating student math performance schools, some of our same schools, again, are popping up on the list, and I want to note some of the large differences in the size of the student group population here in the Hispanic. The top schools with the highest median Hispanic SGP, we have more schools here with low Hispanic student populations. But just to reiterate, these numbers in the 80s and the high 70s are incredibly high SGP, so we should be celebrating all of these schools. Taking a look at our PARC proficiency and growth by English learner status, we wanted to break out for you at first just the absolute proficiency. Again, we will note the very low absolute outcomes for our current English learners, but we want to point out the much higher achievement of reclassified English learners that have exited services. So that third bar, these are students that we monitor for 2 years after exiting EL status. And that last bar are reclassified English learners that have exited more than 2 years ago. How are they performing in terms of absolute proficiency? One other note is about our current EL population. It is typically about 1/3 all new students. So when we look at that as a category, it's a little bit hard to compare year to year because it is not the same students year to year. It's often about 1/3 of the group is brand new to that category. And so that's why we thought this was a helpful breakdown with the category view. Here we have the same view of EL status, but looking at the median SGP outcomes. So here we actually see that English learners are growing at about the same rates of students that were never English learners. They just have a much lower starting point given their language. And we see much faster rates among the other two groups of reclassified English learners. So I think we just want to point out here the tremendous potential of these students here for our district. This is a growing population, and if we are able to exit these English learners, they are performing at very, very high rates. Here's that same cut of median SGP, but for math. And so, again, we see a sort of similar different distribution of scores. And actually, in middle school, current ELs are slightly outperforming students who were never English learners in 6 through 8 for math. Here are some of those top schools accelerating performance for English learners. You'll see English and math next to each other here. We actually, for these call-outs, we've been using a median SGP of 70 as sort of that above 70 highlight. We didn't have any schools reaching 70 for the median English learner SGP in English, but we do have 2 schools at a 69. And on the math side, we do have schools also that are above that threshold of 70. I also want to note here that all of these schools that we're calling out are either medium or high EL sites. Those definitions are in that little corner there. So the high EL sites have 20% or more of the student population as English learner. Medium is 5 to 20%, and low would be 0 to 5%.
And on the next slide, you'll see some of the ways, I want to say, to echo what Liepa said around our growing population, the hard work of our school leaders, teachers, and our central office team here, to really focus what are the supports, the clear roles in the instruction and with the clarity. So you'll see on the left side, the inclusive practices, the idea of the mindset work and instructional practices to make sure these students are included in the curriculum alignment and update. The work that we've done around high-quality materials with access to grade-level content, ensuring that the students have access to content and the standards, with guidance to how does that work align to the instructional models for ESOL, as well as utilization of targeted language objectives so that the language objectives are in support of the content understanding and development. You'll also see student supports that have been put in place, so thinking about both a scaffolding and differentiation for the students as part of their core instruction, thinking about the whole child and language development as ongoing work and focus for our students, and then the systematic progress monitoring and use of data to think about where students need additional supports or where they can be pushed on to different levels as they continue to grow. All in support of staff development to ensure that teachers and school leaders understand the vision of that work, thinking about recruitment, vetting, and hiring of teachers, so not just getting teachers in place, but really attracting the correct teachers for these roles from different demographics that represent our growing populations, expanding differentiated professional development to ensure, again, that teachers have the resources that they need, both what you heard earlier around collaborative planning and coaching work in that, and then finally leadership development to continue that ongoing support.
This last student group we're going to look at today is students with disabilities. So what we have here is the absolute performance on PARC ELA by disability type. We would say that these results are not surprising in terms of how different disability types have different kinds of impairments that are vastly different. So the nature of speech and language impairment is very different than others that might include a cognitive impairment. This type, the speech or language impairment, also has the highest concentration of students in LREA, which is the type of setting that the student is in with access to general education curriculum. So actually for that group, 71% of those students are in LREA, surpassing even the MSD target. I would say the same here we see for math. One note here is that we see slightly higher proficiency rates across all disability types in math than in ELA, which is not what we see across our district as a whole, but among our students with disabilities, math is stronger. Looking at these same disability types by SGP, which is that speed of growth. We see although the district tends to be in the mid or high 40s, some of these disability type groups are actually approaching or surpassing some of those median SGPs, which is quite impressive. Similarly for math, again here, we see actually in the emotional and intellectual disability types, much faster growth in math than in English. And so here are some of those top schools accelerating performance of students with disabilities in both English and math. I'm going to point out that both Stuart Hill and Falstaff have very large proportions of students in LREA, and in these schools, speech and specific learning disability are the largest concentrations of their students with disabilities.
And then finally, you'll see a similar structure for supporting students with disabilities. So again, ensuring inclusive practices with development of schedules to make sure students are included as much as possible. The use of the academic tool to inform the LRE decisions that teachers and schools are making. For student support, access to not just interventions, but research-based interventions, blended learning opportunities, and the same thing we talked about earlier to ensure grade level access to rigor and standards throughout their academic exposure. And finally, staff development, targeted professional learning for not only teachers, but related service providers, IEP chairs, and school leaders. And then finally, providing teachers and that same cadre of folks with the delivery of specially designed instruction to think about the special needs of the students as well as the balance of grade level appropriate materials.
No, I just want to say thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. It was very clear, very precise, and the support that you're giving to the students, the family, the community, you just covered everything. And thank you very much. It was very clear, very clear. Thank you so much. And I think that our community who's listening in, you gave very good information and without any questions that they might have had. You answered all the questions. Okay, thank you so much.
Dr. Berkeley?
I just add my thanks. It was very, very helpful. Thank you. Lot to ponder and study. Thank you.
I love sitting in between two doctors, by the way.
Soon to be.
Yeah, sure, yes. I just want to celebrate the work that we're doing in city schools for our young people, and we are making some really nice strides in order to increase student achievement. However, we are still in the bottom in the state of Maryland as it comes to our student achievement data. So I think that we have the right team and the right folks to get the work done. We just have to continue working together to move the needle even further than we're doing right now. So thanks for the work that you're doing, but let's continue the good fight for the sake of our young people. So thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. Now we are ready for our ESSA Consolidated Strategic Plan 2019. Very eager to hear this and to see this presentation. You're smiling while you're coming up, aren't you?
Hi, Casey Mangles, Special Assistant to the Chief Academic Office. And you know, the reason why I'm smiling is just this. Because as I'm sitting there listening to the previous presentation, and I can't tell you how much I wish that that particular presentation would go right before this one on the night of the public board meeting. I say that because not only the Tench story, right, that we heard, but all of the data that was presented were the same data points the same strategies, it's the same work that we've been looking to do across our schools and are starting to see movement in. And that's what our consolidated strategic plan is intended to do, right? It's intended to present that narrative in 3 key focus areas. And I mean, it was just so beautifully done with the previous presentation, right? So I think that actually, that presentation, the information provided there, will really help to kind of frame exactly why it is we landed on what focus areas we did and how we're going to be seeing different strategies in the actual master plan itself and what those strategies are. So it really was excellent framing. So that's why I'm kind of smiling coming up, because that's just nice. Right? That doesn't often happen. Usually, like, we come up here and now it's a totally different topic that doesn't necessarily relate to the previous one. This, on the other hand, quite intertwined. Anyway. Okay, so the ESSA Consolidated Plan, just to provide a little bit of background, is the same thing as what you've previously heard of as the Master Plan. And this all started back in 2002 with the General Assembly enacting the Bridge to Excellence in Public Schools Act. It was reauthorized through ESSA, and then we're seeing it here in sort of its new and latest iteration. The authorization comes through Section 5, the Comprehensive Master Plans, in the Education article of the Annotated Code of Maryland. So this is something that we are required to do, and this is a new iteration of it, however, per the state. So there's some key components to this plan, and I'm going to go through each of these so you understand what you'll see in each section. But I do want to kind of call out that this presentation is not the walking through of every single strategy that's presented in the master plan, right? The master plan is an incredibly long document which is provided and will be provided to the public online for full preview. What this is going to help do is to set the stage for why we landed where we did, what each section contains, and how folks can then access it and what the timeline is for completing it and submitting it to the state. So I do want to be clear in that regard. I won't be running through the 50 different strategies that we're doing to support ELA and math growth, for example. However, I will be going through these things: the executive summary, the finance section, areas of focus, the comprehensive support and improvement work, the federal and state grant applications, and the COMAR regulations and the questions that the state has had with regard to those. These are the key components of the master plan, and so when you go into the 300-plus page document that exists online, these are the various pieces that comprise it. So within the executive summary, it's really our opportunity to share our district's narrative, right? Why we're focusing in the areas that we want to focus in, how the alignment of our current work goes to support those areas, particularly the blueprint, priorities that have been outlined by the board, by our cabinet, as well as how all of our grant funding goes to support those particular areas of focus. So this is really our chance to tell our story. And the executive summary sort of stands, or could stand, as a standalone document. Really helps just to understand where our vision is. The finance section provides current year budget tables as well as prior year budget tables. The information here really is just pulled from our budget book. The state always asks a couple of clarifying questions. We always provide the answers to those, which you can find in our various budget and expenditure tables that exist within our budget book each year, our fiscal each year. I will say, and something that you're probably noticing as I'm talking, the master plan does not hold new work. The master plan is designed to show the work that we have been doing. So this isn't the place also to be presenting brand new bodies of work that we haven't gotten off the ground yet. Okay, so these aren't new strategies. What's in here should be all things that are familiar to you guys and to the public. So areas of focus. This is really new for MSDE and for the sort of master plan or strategic planning work. In prior years, the state would ask us a series of questions to focus us and to focus our response to the master plan in certain content areas for certain subgroups of students. This year, they've changed it and are asking us to identify up to 3 areas of focus for the district. You may notice that these particular areas align with the new MSDE report card, as well as the star ratings for our schools. And so MSDE is collecting a variety of indicators which goes into each of these buckets, and we were therefore asked to look over our data and select up to 3 of them. I'll get to which ones we selected, but I'm going to keep you on the edge of your seats for a little longer. So the state asks us, in order to identify those areas of focus, that we do a needs assessment, right? So very much to what our folks just presented here, hence why I think this is quite a timely presentation. But as well, to be looking across all of our schools and the Maryland State Report Card indicators, as well as other both qualitative and quantitative measures in order to sort of understand how we're doing in terms of growth and proficiency, the English language proficiency, graduation rate, how we're doing toward being on track to graduation, particularly for our 9th grade students, and then student quality and student success, which in terms of our data is really focused around chronic absenteeism and the ability to offer a well-rounded curriculum. So we're asked to look across these different data points, look across those same data points to ensure equity, right? So making sure that we're disaggregating our data by student subgroup. Again, the presentation did an excellent job of doing that in growth and proficiency as it's focused on math and ELA. And so we did a similar thing here at the district to ensure that we're looking across our subgroups. So we're not just making those initial gut reactions and saying, well, overall we'll focus here or there, that we're really trying to understand how all students are performing. From those assessments, the needs assessment and ensuring equity, we are then asked to identify 2 to 3 areas of focus. Drum roll, please. City Schools, after looking at its data, identified the following 3 areas: academic achievement in reading or English language arts and math, student growth in English language arts and math, and then school quality and student success. So when we talk about achievement, we're talking about proficiency. Right, our baselines, how are our kids performing? For student growth, as you heard in our previous presentation, we were talking about the rate of growth for students. And then for school quality and student success, we are particularly focused on chronic absenteeism. Through each of these areas of focus, we are asked to describe the area, to provide a rationale, to identify root causes contributing to the data that we're seeing in that rationale, and then describe how those root causes are addressed. So we tend to provide in the strategic master plan a high-level overview for each of those areas. We were asked to keep it to under 1,000 characters, not words, but characters. So you'll see in the master plan that those are quite brief explanations, despite knowing that there's a depth of knowledge that goes behind each of them. We are then asked to present for each area of focus this chart that you see up on the screen. It allows us to articulate our goals, objectives, key strategies, timeline, funding sources, and then evaluation mechanisms, or how we're going to monitor the particular goal and progress toward that goal and implementation of that strategy. So what I just want to do very briefly, so you kind of get a little bit of a flavor for each of these. For focus area number 1, academic achievement, I've given an example of a goal. Okay, so one of our goals is that the percentage of students in kindergarten through grade 2 on grade level, as measured by end-of-year DIBELS composite scores, will increase by 20%. So that is a goal that is listed in our strategic plan. We then provide a strategy, right? K2 teachers will become informed and knowledgeable about the what, why, and how of scientifically based reading instruction through professional development and ongoing supports. So across our professional development, we've had a focus on brain-based learning, right? Making sure that we understand how learning takes place in the early years so that we get kids off on the right foot. This is just one example for the academic achievement and how we're trying to improve that baseline proficiency for students. When we think about academic growth, going to that SGP thing that you all just heard about, right? The district will achieve a median student growth percentile of above 50 on Park Math. We know that above 50, as was highlighted by the research team, right? Even hitting that 51 means that we're shrinking that gap between us and the state, right? And we're shrinking the gap then between other subgroups. So a strategy example here is really focused on professional development and differentiating professional development for our math teachers. Oops. In area focus 3, school quality and student success, just a goal example, City Schools' percent of students not chronically absent will increase from 58.2% in the current, in the 18-19 school year to 65% in the 19-20 school year. Historically, that number has been on the decrease. So we're looking to increase that. Right, an example here is that we will support the equipping and smooth functioning of student wholeness rooms across our 41 intensive learning sites to provide students with safe and calming spaces.
So these are examples.
Examples.
They're not actually what they are.
Not at all.
Thank you.
If I had to, that's it. That's all we're doing. No, absolutely not. These are just examples to get a sense of the types of goals that are within the strategic plan. But when you go ahead and read, you'll see there are multiple goals across each, and then underneath of those, an unpacking of multiple strategies. Often those which, and frankly, the principal of Tench Tillman highlighted some of them wonderfully, right? Collaborative planning, ensuring that we have coaching, literacy coaches in schools. You'll see a lot of the work that we're doing in the blueprint reflected across these. A lot of the work that's being funded through some of our concentrations of poverty work. So you'll definitely see when you review the master plan, not just these examples, but many, many others that help to highlight all of the strategies which we feel are poised and ready to really move our schools in these three particular focus areas. The next component of the master plan asks us to report out on what we're doing for CSI and TSI, acronyms, which you've all heard before, so hopefully they're not new, but our comprehensive support and improvement schools, right, those who are performing, they're the lowest performing 5% of schools in the district, and then the targeted support and improvement schools whose students are, subgroups of those students are performing at that same level as the lowest performing 5%. And then our SIG-4 schools. City Schools is the only LSS, local school system, who still has the SIG-4, and so we have to, within that, summarize the action plans. The master plan or strategic plan becomes our place to talk about which schools these are, how we're supporting them as a school district, and sort of allowing us to summarize how we support the different areas of action across the subgroups of schools. COMAR regulations. Within the strategic plan, they have asked us to report out on the following COMAR regs. The educational equity policy, which, as you know, I think is still in draft at the state and has been the subject of recent board meetings with the state. We've included our educational equity policy, which has come before you all, and in fact have aligned not only the rationale and the look at the data to that equity policy, but also our executive summary, and then the evaluation components, ensuring that we're always looking at student subgroups when we do the analysis of different interventions or approaches to our work. So you'll see our equity policy in there. For gifted and talented education, they've asked a series of questions with regard to goals and implementation of our gifted and talented work, and so we've addressed those within the document as well. And then finally, they've asked for an overview of the comprehensive teacher induction and mentoring program, which we partnered with the Office of Talent and Organizational Development to provide. Just wanted to make sure that I'm highlighting that while I'm the one sitting up here and talking about the glory of the strategic plan, that I'm by far the only person who has contributed to it. I just want to make sure that I'm calling out our various academic offices in teaching and learning, college and career readiness, student wholeness, and special education who've contributed deeply to the content of the work. The Office of Achievement and Accountability for ensuring that we're looking at the right data across all our kids so that we can really make sure that we're pushing forward the right strategies. The Equity Office and Dr. Durant was very supportive in ensuring that we were talking about through this document equity in the way that City Schools wants to make sure that we are framing the equity conversation. Finance, of course, contributing to the finance section and ensuring that we have alignment of funds across our work. The Office of Human Capital, Talent and Organizational Development specifically, and then, of course, the schools office, and ensuring that we are bringing it all together. The next part of this, for me anyway, is really requesting feedback. I mean, I'll go to the board with the same presentation, barring any feedback from you all on how it can be improved. We'll present that to the board, and then want to make sure that I'm reaching out and getting feedback on the actual document itself. Not so much this presentation, right? It's more the document. And so I know it says link here on the presentation, but once it's ready to go public, I've worked with the Office of Communications. We'll be posting the link live on our website along with a feedback survey. I've also met with the BTU and we'll be sending them the document directly as well as the feedback link as well so they can distribute that amongst their membership. timeline. So today, here we are, Teaching and Learning Committee. We then go to the public board on the 8th. From the 8th of October through the 8th of November, we leave everything open for public comment and feedback. Again, that feedback survey, everyone can also email me directly. I welcome that every year. On the 15th, our draft submission is due to the state of Maryland. They then take a short window to be able to provide us with any clarifying questions, and then we respond to that by the end of October. Barring any major and significant changes, we'll obviously then bring everything back for public board vote. The presentation won't, in fact, look too much different from this, but what it'll serve to highlight at that public vote time is the feedback that was provided by the community, the feedback that was provided by the state, if and where we made any substantial changes to the document, and then, of course, just this more writ large and how it guides the work. And then we submit it to the state on November 15th, and they are planning to bring that to their board on the 3rd of December. So that is the timeline. Any general questions, comments, suggestions?
Casey, when are we going to get the actual plan?
So the actual plan will be coming to, I believe it can be coming to you all before the board meeting, but then it'll get posted publicly after this is presented to you all.
Just, excuse me, quickly, back to 17, where we have the comprehensive teacher induction and mentoring.
Oh,
Can you speak a little bit more about that?
So in what regard? I mean, that is not my body of work specifically, so.
regulation, how is that COMAR regulation aligned to this plan?
It's a great question. It is and it isn't, right? In that the request from the state with regard to the strategic plan is to just provide an overview of our mentoring and teacher induction supports. It is just what we're doing. You will see throughout the areas of focus and that chart in particular where we're looking at targeting new teachers and providing mentoring and supports and things like that. But it is not so much that, they are coming together within the document. It was simply a request by the state to provide what we're doing in that particular regulation.
Appreciate that.
Sure.
I'd be interested, you said that you were planning to work with the BTU. I think you were talking about that. I'd also be interested in Pizzazza.
Sure.
In PCAB and in the PTA, just to kind of get everyone's ears and wheels and brains turning when it comes to this plan.
Perfect, yes. I had a conversation with the BTU previously and said that I would certainly send them the document and a link directly. And I'm working with communications to make sure that where it's posted on the website makes sense.
Right.
And that it's an easy thing to find. I think it has been fairly in the past, but to be honest, we haven't received a ton of feedback on the master plan in the past. It's also a 380-page document.
But if we know it's coming, like if we
It's a lot to go
if we
through.
know it's coming, I think we could pay more attention and
Yes,
at least I'm saying now, I'm not sure historically,
I
but
hear you.
now I think if we know that it's coming, which is why I asked, I think we could give it a bit more attention so that our engagement with it can be a bit more meaningful.
sure. And I will do my best to get that to you. We're still sort of going through a couple of revisions to it. Certainly the grants component, which is one of the largest, most weightiest sections. It has all of our grant applications, all the titles, get bundled into that. So at the very least, I may be able to guarantee the narrative part that's up at the front, the areas of focus, things like that. Because the grants aren't due until the 15th, the reality is that that's the deadlines that I've set with those offices in order to be able to provide those.
Sure.
I'll do my best. But at the very least, the front end of the document, which I have a feeling is what most folks would be interested in reading
I
to begin with.
appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
And thank you for the suggestion around other groups to engage.
Doctors?
You had great suggestions, thank you.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you, guys.
Now we are ready. Thank you, Chief Jones. I just want to shout you out because, the work that you do aligns to everything that we talked about today. So thanks for your leadership in the work that you do. I will probably say that even more. Thank you.
And thank you.
We're ready for procurement. Good afternoon. How are you?
I am Joe Vogel. I'm the Interim Director of Procurement. There are 4 items on the agenda for this evening. The first is a contract amendment to the current Judy Center's contract to add an additional vendor, Shelley Keith, to provide internal coach services at 4 Baltimore City Judy Centers for an additional contract amount of $95,300 for a grand total of the contract of $1,529,154. The contract term is July 1st of 2019 through June 30th of 2020. The next item is a contract increase with New Fit Kids for student wholeness and physical activity services. The additional cost will go from $500,000 annually to $1,500,000 annually. The current contract term is August 28th of 2019 through June 30th of 2022. The next is an increase to the annual amount of a contract with the Youth Sports Program for student wholeness and physical activity services from $150,000 annually to $400,000 annually. The contract term is August 28th of 2019 to June 30th of 2022.
Dr. Bondima?
Like before I ask this question, when we have contracts that start before it's been approved, the work has already started. Is that correct?
This particular contract was approved August 27th of 2019, and we just need additional funds.
Okay. You need additional
So the
funds to
board-
continue.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
But schools have budgeted, the programs have budgeted for these, correct?
Correct. Whenever the PRC review committee reviews these things, one of our members is a member from finance, and we can check to make sure that there's money in the funds, in the fund string that they
This
provide.
question may not be for you, but I'm curious to know, are we seeing decreases in suspensions in the schools that are using this particular program? Because it deals with this, the social, emotional aspect in relationship to the physical activity, physical fitness, and physical education. And if we look at the letter, give me 1 second. Right, they don't have the ESSA effectiveness, I get that. But it talks about 100% of YSP's programming partners were satisfied with the services provided during the 2015 through 2018 school year. That's not enough. That's not enough evidence for me personally, in thinking about schools and programs continuing with this particular partner and service. So I would be interested in seeing how suspensions are decreasing in these schools. Are we seeing a decrease in the amount of referrals that are being made because of our investment into this program, into these schools? Do we see any other type of achievement data that we could associate with a program like this being in a school? And I'm curious to know how the data is collected to measure the program effectiveness. So it says 100% of the program partners were satisfied, but how did we get that information? I'm curious to know.
I can get that information, report back to you then.
I appreciate it.
And the last item is a contract with the Family League of Baltimore City in the amount of $360,000 annually to support high-quality implementation of community school services. It includes 72 schools that will contract with 27 community-based organizations, and it also includes the out-of-school time programming. The total contract amount is $4,431,079, and the contract term is July 1 of 2019 through June 30th of 2020.
Dr. Bondima?
Okay, thank you. I was looking that over, and it did show that that several schools would not be receiving any funds. So, and does that mean that I know you mentioned that they get funding from other locations, but when they get funding from other locations, like the Promise, what is it, the Promise Academy? Promise Heights, right. When they get funding from other organizations, why do they not receive funding from here?
Hello, my name is
Hi.
Holly Gonzalez. I'm a community school specialist who works here. So for the city grant that community schools receive, it is a $55,000 grant from Family League, and there's a $25,000 match requirement. Those funds go to the community school lead agency. And so if the match is being covered by another source, such as like a 21st Century Community Learning Center grant or a foundation grant, then the match is covered, and there may not be a payment from the school.
Okay. Because I did notice was quite a few that didn't receive any funding. And another thing that would be interesting, the director of the organization, it would be nice if he could attend, and because sometimes I would have questions that I would like to ask in reference to the program that they're doing. They do excellent work, but I thought maybe that he would be here so we can ask. Is he here? Oh, okay. I looked, I didn't see him here.
Yeah, no, Mr. Millard isn't here.
It's quite a few schools involved and quite a few activities, and sometimes we like to hear directly from the person that's running the programs.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
This aligns to the concentrations of poverty money, right? So I think it is written well. Sabrina, thank you for bringing this before us. I have a couple questions, though. With Bell, within the past few months, we've seen other procurement letters for Bell. So how does this relate to the previous procurement letters that we've seen this year?
So this particular board letter is specific to the community school strategy and the community school services that are happening as a part of the overall community school system. So it includes the concentrations of poverty funding. It includes matches to city funding for community schools as well. An organization like Bell or Bell Excels will oftentimes get funding in different schools for a lot of different reasons, or be receiving funding from schools for additional reasons. They are expanded beyond just kind of the community schools. I cannot speak to other procurement letters because I do not have them in front of me, but
No, that makes sense. I just remember seeing Bell come before, so you actually just cleared it up. Yeah, I mean, that was fine. And this might go back to what Dr. Bondima was saying, but why do we see $0 for some of the awards?
one of the things that we wanted to show was the breadth of the strategy, and that even if you may have a community school that's providing expanded learning services through that city grant of an OST partner, a decision was made to kind of show, as I said, that breadth and all the different partners, even if they were not receiving funding on this board letter. And that is, I guess, similar to how it has been done in previous years.
Okay. And then at the bottom where we deal with the effectiveness, the findings from Tier 2 studies within the evidence, how does that relate to a lot of our schools that need additional support?
So,
I want to make sure I'm clear in what I want to ask, but go ahead and chime in, and then if it's not it, I'll come back.
okay, so when we filled out this section, we looked at national research on community schools, showing that it is an evidence-based practice. As you can see, kind of, Achievement Accountability, I believe, has done their own assessment of the research and say they find that it meets these standards. So we wanted to highlight some of the places that have done Tier 2 level or 2 or 3 or 4 research studies that have impacted student achievement, attendance, and some of them behavior, which were in there. One of the works nationally that was done a few years ago is collected in a compendium of research. It was done by the Learning Policy Institute and the National Education Policy Center, and so that is what the resource that is referenced in that section.
A lot of our community schools are struggling schools, and they've been community schools for a while now. So looking at providing, this additional funding to a lot of the partners and programs that they already have, I'm just curious to know how effective the programs have been in these schools if they're still struggling and we're not really seeing the types of gains in achievement that we probably should be seeing.
Yeah, and I think your question actually ties to a body of work that we are still in the planning phase around, which is now that we have this more comprehensive set of schools, what is our approach to measuring the effectiveness and having the evaluation both on the implementation as we roll this out to more and more schools, as well as looking at the effectiveness? Because you're exactly right, like we do have some dated research that sort of spoke to our local context, but in light of this rapid expansion, we need to revisit what that's going to look like going forward so that we can really get at that. So what we all agreed is, considering the timeline that we're working towards, the influx of resources, we needed to make sure that we were at least responsible to speaking to like what is currently available as we put those pieces of the puzzle together.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we'll move into public comment. We have one person that has signed up to speak, and that is Christina Duncan Evans. I do want to remind, I'm sorry? I do want to remind, you can come on up though. I do want to just remind folks, if they are watching or listening, that advanced sign up is permitted beginning at 9 a.m. the Thursday before the meeting until 5 p.m. the Monday before the meeting. So we definitely want people to engage as much as possible. So just make sure that if we want to speak or comment at meetings that we sign up, as Christina Duncan Evans has done today. Welcome.
Thank you. We actually have one person who walked in. She's a teacher from Ben Franklin. Do you think the committee could accommodate her after my 3 minutes?
Sure.
Thank you. Okie dokie. So I wanted to start by giving props to the Office of Teaching and Learning for their presentation. I felt like it told a complete story, and it really did a good job of telling a complete story and then highlighting and lifting up some real positive examples of the good work that's happening in our district. And it was really nice to start today and continue today with a, I guess, asset-based approach to our work, rather than kind of thinking about things in a frame of problems that need to be solved. I had some comments regarding ESSA and the Strategic Master Plan. From what I gather, the strategic plan has been requested by the union. I texted our president to see if we had gotten it. I was on vacation for the first week of August, the first week of September, so I missed the meeting between the district and the union. But I did want to highlight one part of ESSA that I think is really important and was not included. So the education article that spells out the strategic plan includes a really important word, which is each. So we've got this master plan, but one of the critical pieces of ESSA that makes me really excited is the opportunity for school level plans to be developed, because the Maryland statute supporting the Every Student Succeeds Act specifically spells out that the bargaining unit representative should be at each of the should be at the table for each of the CSI schools and TSI schools that create a plan. And thus far, we haven't seen consistent or thorough union engagement at the school level when it comes to implementing these plans. The parts of the process that have happened so far have to do with the local needs assessment, which was conducted by University of Maryland in the spring. From what I can tell from the school plan that I've seen, there was a bargaining unit member at the table at the needs assessment, but that person was not a representative selected by the union. I think that's an important distinction because this is really, really critical work, and we want to make sure that our members are prepared to participate meaningfully. It's really hard as a classroom teacher or a related service provider to go into a conversation about policy where you're asked to kind of like dissect a problem. But we have resources that we can use to engage our members and prepare them for these roles. But we do need to just make sure that we're there at the table. I want to thank Casey for saying that there are no new strategies here. We do need new ideas, but I think they need to come from the ground up. The Every Student Succeeds Act is really written with a spirit of engaging family and community around the table to come up with a set of solutions that are school-specific. And so as the master plan trickles down into plans for CSI schools and TSI schools, I think that it's really important to engage people from the beginning so that those conversations don't end up being the same version of a school improvement plan that we have recycled from 2013. I will be quick in my last point. There are 43 CSI schools in the state of Maryland. 38 of them are in Baltimore City. Now, when I look at the state board documents around this work, I find them alarmingly thin, and they are the body that is supposed to be supporting us in this work. I mean, the plans basically say, step 1, we're going to do a needs assessment. Step 2, we're going to implement a plan. Step 3, schools improve. Like, I'm not kidding. The slide says step 3, schools improve. And so what I would ask board members to do is to really attend these state board meetings, look through the documents, and really push the state board and MSDE to give us the support that we need, because this law, like, while it's really on paper a statewide law, it's like we're 38 out of the 43 schools, right? And so if it's thin on paper at the state level, we're not going to exit CSI status in 3 years because that support won't be there. And so I really think that our board pushing up, and we're going to continue to do it too because we're pushing them too, means that we are really making sure that the support is there from the state, because we need their help on this, and it currently does not look or seem fully fleshed out. I had some specific suggestions for how to apply the equity policy for this work, which I think means going above and beyond the state requirements.
Christine, I'm going to ask if you can get those to us because the time has expired. I want to make sure that we give that opportunity to that additional guest that you recommended to speak this evening.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks
Good
for
evening.
giving.
Would you tell us your
Yeah.
name?
I'm Christine Seeloff. I have been with the district about 16 years, and I'm currently teaching at Ben Franklin High School. I'm here because I and some of my colleagues have recently discovered that we no longer have access to a teaching resource that we did in the past. It's called News ELA Pro. And I found it extremely useful. We were talking about the progress that ELLs have made in the district, and one of the advantages of having a News ELA Pro account is that you can access news articles and adjust the Lexile levels according to the needs of your classroom, so you can differentiate. And if I were teaching American government to newcomers and beginners, I could print out these articles in Spanish as well as in English, so they would have a bilingual text. I'm not sure exactly why we no longer have access to this resource. But for example, I was looking for a text on, now I'm teaching world history. I have a number of ELLs in that class, and I was looking for an article on Genghis Khan. And a lot of those articles are locked. You can only access them with a News ELA Pro account. So I was hoping that you'd be willing to look into this and find out what's going on with that.
I appreciate you coming to us to talk about that. I know at my school, we often change, I don't think it is through a specific program, but we often change the Lexile levels for differentiation. And I don't know if Ms. Lane is able to speak to it at all, the program. Thank you.
Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
This isn't a program that Teaching and Learning specifically endorses or has embedded in the curriculum. It is a program that certain schools use. In the brief heads up that I had about this public comment, I did a little bit of research, and it does look like there's an issue that procurement and legal are currently working on that's separate from our department, but I'm sure that they can provide some additional information.
Okay. So you're going to provide that to us or to this young lady here?
Either. I can connect with the departments that are currently working on this issue
That'd
to
be
make sure
helpful.
that there's follow-up.
So, could you make sure that we have your information? That we don't have it because you didn't sign up.
Yeah,
So
I'm
would you
sorry.
make sure that we have that so
Sure.
that once they send it to us, we can make sure that you get that info?
Sure. Yeah, and the one thing I didn't mention that you brought up is that it can be purchased by a school, and also individual teachers can purchase the program if, in the past they could, but now individual teachers have also been told that they can't have their own accounts.
Joe, please. I mean, because you all are the experts.
Yeah.
I mean, dealing with it. We're just hearing about it right now.
Yes, Nucella, New SCL, or whoever it's called,
New
Nucella,
CLA.
New CLA. Their attorneys are working with our attorneys with some contract language, and it pertains to student information privacy. I don't have those exact terms here in front of me, but we've been going back and forth, and last I heard, we could not agree on language that city schools could agree on. They are still talking, though. They meaning the legal team from New CLA,
New CLA.
and city schools. Both legal teams are trying to work that out.
And I think the reason is because teachers can use it and student can do assessments online and it stores data. That's my understanding, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Our next meeting is scheduled for November the 5th, 2019. We'll be receiving a student wholeness office update in addition to 21st century academic update. I'm eager to hear about that. And we'll also be receiving a written update in regards to fine arts. Anything else? Good doctors?
Thank you.
Well, we are adjourned today at 5:19. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Good meeting. Well done.
Thanks. I was going to ask Janice